So good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I have been a big fan of this conference for years, but it's my first time to attend it in person, so I really appreciate. So my name is Michelle Miaolu. I also have an African name called Ajua, meaning born on a Monday. So I'm from the Department of Cultural Studies at Lingnan University in Hong Kong. The research I want to share today is a collaborative project with Dr. Sarah Mavli from University of Massachusetts Amherst. Unfortunately, Sarah cannot join us due to teaching obligations. So the title of our presentation is Data Center for the Tropics, Heat Management, Chinese Tech, and Energy Politics in West Africa. It's still work in progress. We just finished part of the fieldwork this summer, so today I will share some thoughts and preliminary findings. Before I start, let me briefly introduce my background to give you a better sense of my scholarship. So starting from 2016, I have been researching the rise of Chinese technology in the global south. My first project, which is also my PhD project, looks at Chinese mobile phone in Africa. I studied a Shenzhen-based company called Chuanyin, which is currently the largest mobile phone seller in Africa. I finished this project. My book will come out this December with the University of Illinois Prize. After joining Lingnan, I started 2 new projects, both about infrastructure. One is about China-built base stations in Africa. As you may know, base station is a kind of last-mile infrastructure that connects our phone to the internet through a side tower. So specifically, I'm looking at a lightweight base station project from Huawei called Eurostar, which can provide 3G and 4G services to rural areas in the developing world. So the picture in the middle shows a few Huawei engineers deploying a Eurostar base station to bring the internet to this small village in Ghana. So if the village is not electrified, the base station can be powered by a few solar panels. So it's much more affordable and flexible compared to traditional side towers. Another project I've been doing right now is what I call tropical data center, because I want to study China-built data centers in the tropics. So these are 2 data centers I visited, one located in Jakarta, Indonesia, and the other in Accra, Ghana, which is also I'm going to talk about today. So the demand for data center is not new, but it's being accelerated by the global race for AI and cloud computing, as exemplified by the high-profile Stargate project led by OpenAI. As other speakers mentioned yesterday, a data center is important because it's where AI is being materialized. And according to the industry prediction, global demand for data center could more than triple by 2030, depending on how quickly and widely we will be using AI. And far from being a neutral infrastructure, data center often invokes certain socio-technical imaginaries in many countries. So in Iceland, state and industry leaders mobilize the images of wildness and greenness to attract foreign investment in data center industry. And in the US, especially the Rust Belt, constructing data centers for Silicon Valley tech giants brings the anticipation of economic growth and imaginations of technological modernity. And in Guizhou, southwest China, data centers are linked with provincial big data dreams, and meanwhile, the larger project of state building as China aims to enhance its cyber tower in the global cloud race. So in practice, however, many of these promises are contested and challenging the tacto-utopian green narratives around AI and cloud. Many scholars have reviewed the environmental politics of data centers, like the enormous consumption of water and electricity, the generation of heat, waste, and carbon pollution. And tensions have been documented in many communities where data center operation depleted local resources like water and electricity. And facing a variety of environmental challenges, many data centers are strategically positioned in temperate zones like Nordic countries to utilize the cold air for reducing the temperature, a technique known as free cooling or natural cooling. So if we look at the current geographical distribution of data centers, a majority of them concentrate in temperate zones. As you can see from this map, North America and Northern Europe have the two biggest clusters, which is not surprising given that North America hosts a lot of big tech companies. And while Northern Europe has cold air, renewable energy, and favorable tax policies, all of which can be very attractive for data center investors if they want to reduce the energy cost and carbon footprint. By contrast, only a small number of data centers are located in the tropics. I added a tropical belt to this map, which might not be very accurate, but still we can clearly see the difference, right? Well, things have been changing recently with the rise of Chinese cloud providers. So as the domestic market gets more and more crowded, Chinese tech companies are going overseas to look for new opportunities, with many making forays into the tropics. Huawei, for example, has been building data centers across the African continent. Previously, Huawei had played a critical role in building Africa's 3G and 4G networks. Data center is a relatively recent business in response to the rapid digitalization in the continent. And in 2021, when Senegal opened a national data center built by Huawei to enhance its digital sovereignty, it triggered concerns over the dependence on Chinese tech. And in Southeast Asia, Chinese companies like Tencent, Alibaba, and also the Shanghai-based GDS, 万国数据, are investing heavily in Singapore, Malaysia, and Indonesia. And departing from the temperate normality, China's expansion into the tropics suggests both the geography and materiality of cloud infrastructure in flux. And this raises a lot of questions about the business logics and infrastructure practice of Chinese tech companies. For example, the hot and humid tropical climate is often deemed as disadvantageous for data center operation. So since servers will break down in conditions that are either too hot or too cold, thermal control has been essential for data centers to keep the temperature within certain range. That's why sophisticated cooling systems are often required to maintain the optimal temperature inside a data center. So in this sense, the work of computation is also the work of managing heat. And data center can be seen as a type of thermal infrastructure. That's why a great number of scholars are attending to the thermal cultures of media infrastructure, including me. So in her inspiring essay, Thermal Cultures of Geological Media, Nicole Starosiewski argues that thermal manipulation is critical to the transformation of the Earth's raw material, such as copper and silicon, into media, and to maintaining those materials as media. And one interesting thing she mentioned that when the first air conditioner was invented in 1901, it was not intended to cool humans, but rather to standardize the temperature of color printing, because fluctuating temperatures will make the inks overload imperfectly in color printing. So the question we want to ask in this question is how heat is managed in running a tropical data center, and how do Chinese tech companies navigate the heat problem in the tropics, especially given the recent green turn in the data center industry. So specifically, we use tropical materiality as a theoretical framework to explore the thermal practice of tropical data center. On the one hand, this framework draws from media studies, infrastructure studies, and STS, science and technology studies, that increasingly explores the environmental politics of data infrastructures. On the other hand, we want to intervene in current scholarship that predominantly comes from European temperate contexts and is informed by Western philosophies and theories. Put it another way, we want to tropicalize data center studies. So we define tropical materiality as how tropicality intersects with materiality in making artifacts, including infrastructures. So the materiality here is easy to understand, which refers to the quality and character of material matters that are used to make artifacts. So the tropicality here refers to an assemblage of climatic, geographic, and imagined traits about tropical lands and people, which often mixes natural differences with cultural interpretations. Therefore, tropicality is not neutral, but embeds positive or negative meanings. And this is because the tropics are both a geographical zone and an imaginative construct. So geographically speaking, the tropics are regions of Earth surrounding the equator, located between the latitude lines of the tropical Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn, 南北回归线之间。So unlike the clear boundaries between continents and seas, climatic zones are created by the longitudinal distinctions on the planetary level. They are invented as both a place and an epistemology. So in European imaginations, the tropics often appear as a duality. On the one hand, the tropics are imagined as an earthly paradise with beautiful nature, abundant resources. On the other hand, the tropics are seen as a dangerous place with tropical disease, uncivilized people, and culture. So when Europeans defined foreign lands as the tropics against the metropole, they also ranked the climates, with the temperate zone indicating the mild, suitable, and well-disposed, while the tropics indicating the dangerous, inferior, and uncomfortable. And since the colonial era, infrastructure has been a critical element of European engagement with the tropics. So through building infrastructures of mining, ports, railways, and plantations, the colonial states and the royally chartered companies opened the tropics to the global trade, including the slave trade. And facing unfamiliar environments, the imperative to study, to control, and modify the tropics gave rise to modern disciplines of botany, architecture, and medicine. When architects construct tropical architecture to cope with the heat, doctors tackled the threat of tropical disease by producing new tropical knowledge and deploying new medical infrastructures. So to some extent, the successful colonization of tropical lands is a matter of knowledge and of the application of knowledge. So if we define tropical knowledge as a way of knowing what the tropics are and how to use them or live with them, the hegemonic knowing subjects have been Europeans, whose knowledge structure facilitates the accumulation of modern capitalism in the tropical world, and meanwhile reconfigured the tropical materiality. So, for example, in this interesting book called Cooling the Tropics, the author Haley Julia Hobart looks into the history of ice and coldness in Hawaii. So to facilitate the tropical acclimatization of white occupants, ice was employed as infrastructures of cold to calibrate the thermal environment in Hawaii, which also contributed to new leisure cultures and lifestyles. So the other two pictures were taken by me when I visited the Dakar railway station in Senegal, West Africa this June, which is a typical example of tropical architecture, I guess. I didn't see any air conditioner used, but it felt pretty cool when I was moving around in the station. And the history of this railway station can be traced to 1884 during the colonial era. As the first railway line built in French West Africa, it played a crucial role for the global transport of raw materials from this region. And some people even say the city of Dakar have grown around this transport hub. So here, heat management not only aims to make people's mobility comfortable, but also to facilitate the extraction of raw materials for the global trade. In either case, heat is not a depoliticized phenomenon, but socially, politically, and culturally produced and managed. Well, despite its hegemony, the West is not the only knowledge producer about the tropics. What the tropics are is not static either. So in different historical periods, the term tropics refers to overlapping geographic areas with the colonies, the third world, the global south, and more recently, the emerging market. So the dramatic terminology change not only suggests the changing geopolitical and geoeconomic positions of the tropics, but also the changing knowledge power complex. So in the mid-20th century, for example, the tropics evolved into the center of a global revolution when oppressed countries self-identify as the third world and fought for independence. In particular, guerrilla wars appropriated tropical knowledge by transforming the jungle into a means of camouflage while utilizing the heat as a source of warmth. And if you look at the propaganda posters designed in the Maoist era, one popular theme is black guerrilla fighters reading Mao's Little Red Book. So in these Chinese imaginations, the tropics became a space of revolution that is progressive, dramatic, and justice-oriented. And it's also in this period that China started its large-scale infrastructure engagement with the tropics. And to assist the newly independent nations, China funded a large number of infrastructure aid projects in the African continent. And China often highlighted their anti-colonial and anti-imperialist nature. And one notable example is the Tanzania Railway, Tanzan 铁路, financed by China in the 1970s. And so by linking Tanzania with Zambia's copper belt, Tanzania Railway reduced their dependence on colonial railway. and hailed as the Freedom Railway, Tanzania is widely articulated as a symbol of Asia-African solidarity. Well, in practice, however, Chinese aid project encountered numerous challenges, which also pushed China to explore alternative approaches. So in Africa, the lack of capital led the Chinese to use the labor-intensive approach of the poor, helping the poor to build Tanzania, which involved intensive cooperation between the two sides. Another big challenge faced by Chinese engineers is the lack of local knowledge and statistics. So in Liu Ye's study about Chinese aid project in the Maoist era, he interviewed a Chinese engineer who had worked in Sri Lanka. He revealed that when the Chinese team arrived in Sri Lanka for an aid project, the technical data provided by local government included snowfall statistics. And they later realized that this data was generated by and for the British metropole instead of Sri Lanka. And I also encountered a fun example during my trip to Malacca, Malaysia this year. So when the Dutch colonizers arrived in Malacca in the 17th century, they built houses with fireplace in preparation for the cold winter, without knowing that the winter in the tropics is different from the winter that's in Northern Europe. So I found this picture online where you can still see the chimney on the rooftop of the Dutch colonial houses. So in such context, how to engage with tropicality, less mediated by Western knowledge, became a new task for Chinese engineers. And to make the infrastructure more tropical responsive, Chinese engineers had to unlearn Western knowledge on the one hand, while relearning the tropics from the Chinese perspective on the other hand. And oftentimes, they had to conduct their own surveys. As Liu Ye documented, the construction of a textile factory in Tanzania entailed a systematic learning of local environment by collecting data about sunshine, wind, rain, humidity, mildew, insects, rivers, and soil. So questions thus arise when China taps into the tropics to build digital infrastructure in the 21st century, which requires a lot of new knowledge to make the data center not just functional, but also green. So what are the challenges? How might the tropics be reconfigured and reimagined in the digital era? So to explore these questions, we focused on Ghana National Data Center as a major case study. So located in the capital, Accra, the Ghana National Data Center was built by Huawei in 2016 and financed by a concessional loan from China Exim Bank, 中国进出口银行. So its daily operation was managed by a government agency called NITA, National Information Technology Agency. So the picture here shows the NITA headquarters, which is also where the data center is located. When I visited last year, the data center only occupies 2 floors inside this building. Well, in response to the growing demand, NITA has been working with Huawei to expand it since last November. And the major research methods we use are ethnographic fieldwork and interviews. So we haven't finished the data analysis yet. So today I will only share some preliminary findings around these 4 questions. First, why does Ghana want to build this data center at the very beginning, and why Huawei? And according to my interviews with NITA officials, the data center project was conceived as early as 2012 when the government realized that the lack of infrastructure had become a major hurdle to Ghana's digitalization efforts, either for public or private sector. So if the government could build this data center, it can lease out the space to people who need it so that they don't need to build their own infrastructure. So the major motivation of building this data center was to stimulate the market at the beginning. So by this year, around 25% of the data center capacity is used by government agencies, and around 75% by private sectors, including some banks and telecom operators. During and after COVID-19, this demand grows even faster as more Ghanaians are using digital technologies and services. So when I talked to a NITA official this summer, he said that the market has taken off, and the future goal of NITA is to transform Ghana into a data center hub in West Africa. Because he thinks Ghana is politically stable, it connects to a few undersea cables, it has stable power supplies compared to other African countries. So for a few times during our conversation, he mentioned the opportunities of digital economy, or AI, and how data center is crucial for taking up those opportunities. And meanwhile, he also envisioned Ghana becoming a popular location of digital embassy if other African countries are willing to store their government data in Ghana. He said in the future, the role of NITA will shift from a data center provider to a regulator to facilitate more data center providers coming to Ghana. Well, whether this can be achieved or not is yet to be seen, but I think this narrative suggests a new type of socio-technical imaginary in Ghana, which not only aims to stimulate the domestic market, but also dreams about becoming a regional hub in West Africa. And then, why Huawei? So according to Solomon, the technical director of NITA, they choose Huawei due to economic considerations. So technically speaking, Huawei was not the best at the time. Cisco and Ericsson and Nokia are much better back to 10 years ago, but Huawei was cheaper, and Huawei came with funding. What he means here is not that Huawei funded this project itself, but that Huawei facilitates the negotiation between NITA and China, which provided a loan to Ghana to fund this project. And interestingly, Solomon says, even if they have their own money right now, they are still willing to work with Huawei because, quote unquote, Huawei has grown so much and its technology is very advanced. So this pattern repeats in my observation of other sectors like 3G, 4G networks, and in some other countries like Senegal. So during its early expansion in Africa, Huawei often benefited from the financial support from Chinese development banks, but this factor becomes less important as the company moves up the value chain by making its technology both affordable and reliable. So to manage the heat generated by the servers, NITA uses a technique called water cooling to cool down its data centers. It's a type of liquid cooling that uses water to lower the server's temperature. So compared to other techniques such as air cooling, liquid cooling is quieter, more efficient, but also costs more because it consumes a lot of water and electricity. So in the NITA case, water is supplied by Ghana Water Company, and power is supplied by ECG, Electricity Company of Ghana. Both are state-owned public utility companies. And one important indicator to measure a data center's power efficiency is the PUE value, short for power usage effectiveness. So PUE was introduced by an NGO called the Green Grid in 2007 and quickly became a global industry standard for measuring the power efficiency of data centers. So the Green Grid is a nonprofit open industry organization headquartered in Oregon, the US, which aims to improve the resource efficiency of data centers. It has 175 members, including Dell, HP, IBM, Oracle, and Microsoft. So mathematically speaking, the calculation of PUE uses a very simple formula. You just need to divide the total facility power, that is, total energy consumption in the data center, by the IT equipment power, that is, energy used by the IT equipment. So a lower PUE means higher efficiency with an ideal score of 1.0. So 1 means that all power is used for IT equipment and none for cooling. A higher PUE indicates that significant energy is wasted on cooling and other supporting systems. And according to my interviews with NITA engineers, the PUE of Ghana National Data Center ranges from 1.5 to 1.9, which is not very efficient compared to other countries. In 2021, the Chinese government set standards of 1.3 PUE for data centers in temperate regions and 1.25 for colder regions, which is a very strict standard. And after this standard took effect, many Chinese data center providers shifted from air cooling to liquid cooling because traditional air cooling can never meet this efficiency requirement. Well, in the tropical world, Singapore is one of the few that have set up a PUE standard, which is also 1.3 and also very strict. Another data center I visited in Ghana has a PUE of 2.2, even higher than this one. So this means that data centers in Ghana have to waste more energy to cool down its data centers, which is understandable given its hot climate. Although Ghana hasn't set up any PUE standards for its data centers, institutions like NITA are motivated to lower the PUE because higher PUE value means higher electricity bills. So to make sure that power is always on, NITA adopts the 2N+1 architecture for its data center, which means it has 2 independent power systems, that is 2 different grades, plus an extra diesel generator for emergency use, for example, during blackouts. Unlike big cities such as Shanghai, blackout is still very common in many African cities. And in Ghana, people coined this term called doomsday to describe the frequent blackout during previous energy crises, meaning off and on. So the picture on the left is the diesel generator as backup power for NITA data center, because data center does not like blackouts. So regarding Ghana's national grids, it currently relies on thermal power plants that generate electricity from fossil fuels like oil and natural gas, and hydropower plants that generate electricity from moving water. And while hydropower used to be the primary power source in Ghana, but as the water level becomes lower due to climate change, Ghana increasingly shifted to thermal power stations, which now accounted for 2/3 of its electricity production. So back to the NITA data center, although my interviewees didn't disclose the details, this data center consumes a lot of power. There was a time when the electricity bill was so high that NITA cannot afford it. So ECG, Electricity Company of Ghana, threatened to cut off the grid if NITA didn't pay the bill. So to diversify its energy source and reduce the cost, NITA introduced solar energy in November 2024 by transforming its parking lot into a mini solar farm. So when I visited a few months ago, I saw birds standing on the solar panels, which beautifully captures the entanglement between nature and data infrastructure. So there are two major motivations behind the use of solar energy. First is to reduce its dependence on grid power and thus ECG. Second is that NITA wants to set an example for other data center operators that they can reduce the environmental footprint by using more green energy. So at the national level, Ghana pledges to achieve net zero carbon emission by 2060 and sets a target of having 10% renewable energy in its electricity mix by 2030 as a commitment to the Paris Agreement. So the percentage of renewable energy is only 1 in Ghana by 2025. So solar energy will be a critical element of this green transition. And with the investment from the World Bank, or Europe, and increasingly China, Ghana has introduced a number of solar projects over the past decade. And viewing the sun as an opportunity, investors and policymakers often depict how African countries can leapfrog to a green energy future by taking advantage of the tropical climate while avoiding carbon-intensive fuels like oil, coal, and natural gas. So here, the heat from the sun is seen as a result instead of a challenge. In reality, however, Ghana's energy transition does not happen along a linear, singular pathway, but full of erratic, contradictory logics. The first challenge is that solar energy is not necessarily cheaper. In Ghana, solar energy is often more expensive than other sources of knowledge, especially in the first few years. And one major reason is ECG signed too many take-or-pay contracts in the early days. So take-or-pay contracts is a commonly used contract in the energy industry where a buyer either buys electricity from a producer or pay a penalty for electricity it does not use. So the picture here shows a huge solar farm I visited in a small town called Winneba, 2 hours from the capital, Accra. So it's one of the largest solar power stations in West Africa. It's built by a Chinese company called Minage, and the boss is a businessman from Guangdong province. So when Ghana promoted a solar project in 2016, many companies were interested, but only Minage, this company, was able to secure enough capital to build it. And the first phase cost him around $20 million. So Minage signed a 25-year take-or-pay contract with ECG with an electricity price of 20 cents per kWh, which is around 1.42 RMB per kWh, 大概1度电1块4毛钱. And this is very high if you compare it with Shanghai, which is at 0.6 RMB per kWh. And when I interviewed ECG this summer, they told me they were negotiating with this Chinese company to lower the price. Well, in principle, you cannot change the price once you have signed this take-or-pay contract. But the price was so high that ECG cannot afford it anymore. And another big challenge of solar energy is maintenance. So maintaining solar infrastructure in the tropics can be difficult due to the shifting tropical materiality. For example, solar energy can be very unstable due to the changing tropical climate. Like during the rainy season from May to September, solar panels often have difficulty in converting sunlight into electricity. If the battery gets short-circuited during lightning strikes, the whole panel will break down. And the dry season also has its problem due to the occurrence of Hamadan, a dusty season between November and March that will bring a lot of dust. And too much dust will also affect solar panels in capturing sunlight. And when I talked to local workers in the solar farm, they told me that their job also included weeding and cleaning the bird droppings. because they can also affect solar panels in negative ways. I put the picture here to give you a sense of how wild the grass is. If it's too tall, it will block the sun. So in this sense, I think the industry narrative is quite misleading by depicting solar energy as a clean, easy, and affordable energy solution, which significantly mystifies the solar technology by obscuring its everyday materiality. And unstable materiality is not something data centers would like. So to summarize, there exist at least 2 layers of thermal manipulation in the case of the NITA data center. In terms of electricity generation, it's a process of transforming natural or chemical elements, such as the sun, fossil fuels, into heat, and then electricity. In terms of cooling system, it's a process of using water and electricity to reduce or eliminate the heat generated by computer servers. And both processes assemble social, political, and natural forces that may stabilize or destabilize the data center operation. So in such context, thermal manipulation of data centers are not just technical activities, but also socio-cultural practice that involves normative assumptions about what kind of material transformation can or should take place in a society. If heat management for a green data center entails a series of requirements regarding its carbon emission, power efficiency, and use of renewable energy, we need to ask who has the power to make these decisions, how and why, and with what impact. In particular, we call for cultural studies of heat to reconceptualize thermal practice that are socio-cultural and socio-technical. And last, instead of treating nature as a neutral background, we should add it as an important actor which interacts with state and capital in shaping the materiality of data centers. So at the operational level, we approach tropical materiality by analyzing how state and capital mobilize various elements to power, cool down, or maintain data centers. While we reject climate determinism that considers climate as the only decisive factor, we acknowledge the agency of elements in data center development. They can be reconfigured by various types of state and capital, and they may resist or push back against the imposed control. So overall, we hope to elicit new inquiries about the materiality of data infrastructure from a tropical perspective. So last, I want to ask a provocative question that what if Shanghai becomes a tropical city in the next century because of global warming? You know, the tropical zone is not fixed, but may bridge its existing lines if the Earth gets warmer and warmer in the future. And if Shanghai becomes a tropical city, current tropical cities like Accra or Malacca will become super hot places that we have never seen, right? I hope humanity will still exist in that world, and I hope that will not happen. So I will stop here. Thank you. I look forward to your comments.
谢谢陆淼老师的分享。下面进行问答环节，如果有观众想要提问，请举手示意。
Yeah, thank you for the talk and the provocative idea of tropical materiality, the construction of the tropics as a colonial, European concept, which is, of course, goes on top of all of the African nations, which are constructed also by colonialism, the modern day countries that are there, just like in Central and South America, those borders are drawn by colonial forces. But this is another layer on top of this, that all of what the tropics is and what we imagine it to be is this way. I was interested, though, in the contrast between Dylan's film and the way that people in Catalonia, in Brazil, other places are coming up with decentralized, not just concepts, but decentralized approaches, decentralized technologies for internet access. And even though this approach is very sensitive to temperature, humidity, weather, it's still sort of taking the industrial or post-industrial data center and then putting it into the tropical context. So I'm wondering if there's any thinking beyond the data center, which is the centralized idea. Is there a decentralized idea that is an answer to the data center?
Do you mean, can we build build the internet without data center?
Yes.
Oh, I don't think that's impossible. Because you need to transfer a lot of data, right? For the internet, basically it's about data moving around the world. And you have to store the data somewhere. So that's why data center is where the internet is materialized, where AI is being materialized. So thanks for your question. I think I left early last night to prepare this talk, so I may missed some part of Dylan's film. But I know the Brazil case. I think is fascinating. Actually, another project of mine is about the base station, right? And in Brazil, people are also building their own community internet using local resources like local trees or wooden pole. So there are also cases that people can build their own community internet, like the one Dylan's film showed yesterday. But I think it's decentralized. But my question is, can it scale up, right? And if it cannot scale up, that's a question. Like, if you want to connect more people, right? Because because the internet is basically a network, and the scale is a very important factor here. So maybe one thing we can think about is how to connect those local community internet with the mainstream internet. Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking of, there are peer-to-peer networks on the internet, like Napster earlier and BitTorrent, more recently. And so they don't actually require that there be a centralization of a data resource. If we're talking about data itself and not GPUs running, then the data itself doesn't all have to be stored in one place. Just like our libraries, we don't have to have one library per country, or like a very small number. They can be distributed throughout the area, and people can access those libraries in different ways. So I would just think, yes, you are definitely correct that data centers are how the internet is materialized right now, but we could always imagine, we could think beyond that.
Okay, thanks for pointing this out. Yes, I think our imagination is limited to some extent enclosed by the industry narrative, right? I think we need to open up the imagination, and I'd like to know more about the case you mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor. I like your idea of tropical materiality, and my question lies in the other side. Infrastructure studies show that infrastructures in the global south are often like fragmented and expedient, broken, or temporal. But I wonder if that same phenomenon also happened in your case because data centers are somehow more centralized. They need more resources to build. So I wonder if this kind of a fragmentation also happens in the construction of data centers, like in Africa or in Southeast Asia. And another question is, I also wonder which local actors or communities participate in the construction of data centers, and how these Chinese tech companies like Huawei interact with the local actors. Thank you. That's two questions.
Okay. Both are very interesting questions. First is about the fragmentation. I think yes, because in the Ghanaian case I'm looking at, they have a few clusters. One is in Accra, the capital, and the other in second largest city, Kumasi. And these are basically two largest clusters, and to cover the whole region, right? But they want to build more data centers, but it's very costly, and there's no plan for now yet. And I think the fragmentation, in my case, is more about the maintenance. You know, because the maintenance is very challenging. And if you look at the solar panels, you don't know where the electricity comes from, right? If you are supplying power to this data center, but the electricity may come from different power plants, solar farms. That's one thing I think related to the fragmentation. But it's very difficult to trace where the power comes from, the electricity comes from. So the second question is about the local actors and local companies. I don't have sufficient information about it right now, but I heard that the building was constructed by a local company because it's a requirement for the contract, because they want to create local jobs. It happens often for those state project funded by Chinese loans, and oftentimes African states insist using local company because they want to create more jobs. So basically Huawei is providing equipment. So, and I think Huawei, the biggest thing Huawei is interested in is selling with equipment. I think Huawei and its expertise is not on the construction side, right? Yeah. Yeah, but I will observe more in terms of their interactions, maybe in my next trip. Thanks for your question.
陆博士你好，就是非常感谢你的分享。然后我这边也有一个问题是，也是一直很困扰我自己。
100 years ago, colony has been doing, and
光是攫取当地人的一些知识文化，但是现在中国没有在做这件事情。但是我觉得这一点并不能很让我信服，是因为我觉得我们现在目前正处在一个新殖民主义的框架下面。就是我从你的分享当中，我并没有感觉出华为和一些其他的西方大公司有在做什么不一样的事情。对，就是所以我还是比较好奇，如果说中国的企业要在非洲做很多事情的话，我觉得还是要和一些更多的和当地的文化所互动。对，但是我不知道这一点进展的怎么样了，因为我也看很多非洲他们当地的人会一直很抱怨大型的公司在他们当地所做的很多破坏。然后我也觉得数据中心这个作为一个非常中心化的东西，它更多的还是一个政府侧的这么一个对接，它并没有太下沉到当地的文化和社群当中去，所以这也是一个非常困扰我的问题。对，包括他们也会说像债务陷阱这些都是听了很多的词语了，所以我也是很困惑这一点。就是对于中国来说，我们真的可以做到一个非殖民视角下的，又帮助他们当地发展经济的这么一个行为吗？对。
那这个问题我就用中文来回答好了。这是一个很重要的问题，也是一个很难的问题。首先呢，我会讲一些20世纪的历史毛时期的历史还有殖民地时期的历史。我觉得回顾历史是很重要的，是因为所有的这些事情都不是decontextualized， 我们需要去回溯历史，然后去 historicize 这一个过程是怎么发生的。但我并不是说我们非得要用以前的那些框架，不论是西方的殖民主义，或者是中国的毛时期的win-win 或者是 anti-colonial 那些来 frame 现在的这个。我们需要回顾历史的同时，要跳出这些框架。然后你问，那中国现在做的是跟新殖民主义是新殖民主义吗？它到底是什么 ？What's the nature of Chinese capitalist investment in Africa？ 这些就是我觉得是需要一些 empirical study 实实在在的研究去探索的。不是说你要给它一个 label， 它是就是 yes or no， 它是或不是。它可能是非常复杂的，然后是非常是矛盾的，然后不同的 industry 是不一样的。你比如说最近这一年我在做的，比如说手机，或是它那个基站，还有现在的数据中心，或者是你看之前其他的铁路大坝呀这些，它其实是每个 industry 都有自己不同的 dynamic， 对吧？有些 industry 我觉得可能是非常贴近，跟 Western capital 没有什么太大的区别但是有一些 industry 可能会有一些不同的 dynamic 出来所以我没有一个one size fits all 那个 answer 给你，就是因为它是 industry different，industry 是不一样的，然后可能不同国家也不一样，因为不同国家它的 negotiation 那个 power 是不一样的，所以它如何去发展。我觉得是需要一些 empirical research 是去看的，可能是industry by industry, country by country, and case by case, and 可能等我们的那个观察已经足够深入、足够全面之后，我们可以有一个 conclusion。然后这个是什么？这个 the nature of Chinese capital 是什么？对。我觉得可能现在已经有个非常多的中国的学者已经在走出去回答这个问题了，不知道你是不是也是其中一个 ？Thank you。
还有观众有问题吗？
陆苗老师您好，我自己本身是长期关注那个中国的数据中心的发展，特别是贵州贵安新区那一边。然后在黄老师开幕时候也提到了中国有东数西算这样一个政策。那可能像是我们都知道，我们计算的部分其实大部分是放在东部的沿海地区。那像在贵安，他们其实做的更多的是一个冷数据的一个储存。然后哪怕像今年华为要在贵安说是要建成一个他们人工智能的一个算力中心。但是实际上贵州的情况，可能更多他们算力的那个部分体现在他们在做那个渲染农场，也就是影视渲染这个方向。那我想问一下您您对于非洲数据中心的研究当中，他们可能这些数据中心，他们现在主要的一个储存的类型，或者他们有没有自己的这个算力的部分？以及它可能在空间上面可能会不会有不一样的一些功能分布
？OK， 目前我在看的这个 National Data Center， 我觉得是比较传统的，你看是10年前建的，然后又是在非洲，我觉得是比较基础的一个 Data Center， 它主要功能也是一个存储。然后像除了政府的数据，还有一些那个银行的呀，还有那个 telecom 那些通信的那些数据，主要是一个备份来用的。目前我还没有看到，中国现在一直在讲 AI DC、AI Data Center， 那个。但我觉得，非洲这个我看的 case 还没有这么 advanced。但是东南亚的话，像 Malaysia and Indonesia 那些已经非常多了。然后我觉得是不同类型的市场，dynamic 也会非常不一样。然后东南亚的话，我觉得是变得非常热，最近几年变得非常热，是因为他们那边就可以用到英伟达的芯片。They can use NVIDIA or H100 in Malaysia and Indonesia， 所以其实很多连在国内做不了的运算，他们可能会跑到东南亚，马来亚或印尼，然后会去做。但那边是有很多的 AI DC、AI Data Center，but 在非洲的话，我看的 case 还是比较基础的，并没有太多算力啊、运算啊、AI 的成分在里面。但也许后面会有呢，因为市场发展的这么快。
好，谢谢您。
还有观众想要提问的吗？请举手示意。
Okay, thank you for your talk, Professor Ru. I think it's very important issues in theoretical and practical. I mean, the topicality of this word is so kind of challenge to the Western colonial, setup, right? But in practically, I just wonder. I know it's a developing process, but it's also a new geographical expansion on the database world, right? I mean, it's a new space fix and led by China. And I would say that it's because when we say global south, you may know we have another term to replace the global south. It's called global majority, right? Because the south is more than white people countries. I think the populations. So I think if we talk about the Trumpiality, you cannot avoid to answer a new capitalist way on the data center world. I just want to know, of course, I totally agree. We need more empirical studies. But I just want to know, how do you see the capitalist way expansion, especially on the global majority and like San Francisco's Silicon Valley? So that's kind of geographical context. I just want to know, what do you think right now?
Okay, thanks for your question. Because this research is still work in progress, so I do not have a solid conclusion about the Chinese capitalist approach. But that's a question I want to explore, I want to answer in my future research. One thing I want to highlight is that capital making is relational. I think we need empirical research to explore how it unfolds in local contexts, and we can theorize, and then we can theorize on basis of this empirical observation. But I think previous research have observed some differences between Chinese capital and Western capital, like especially regarding Chinese state capital. Right, in Africa, it's less mobile. It's less profit oriented. It's not about profit maximization. It may oftentimes is entangled with other political objectives. And that also makes the capital less mobile compared to international private capital. Well, whether this is a good thing or bad thing for African countries, I don't know. So it really depends how they can negotiate with capital, be it Western capital or Chinese state capital. And I do think in the data center case, I think I'm observing different approaches in West Africa and Southeast Asia, because I want to connect these two regions through the framework of tropical materiality. So in Africa, the commonly used approach is Chinese state capital, Huawei, and African national data center. But in Southeast Asia, the major player are Chinese private companies like Tencent, Alibaba. So you don't see Chinese state capital. No, from my fieldwork, I think, at least from my fieldwork, I think private capital is the dominant players in Southeast Asia. But I only visit there once, so I don't have detailed observation about the difference. I will let you know if I have the answer in the future. Thank you.
I really want to see the final results when you finish the study, because I think it's very important to China and the global as well. So I really appreciate today's your talk.
Thank you.
还有观众想要提问的吗？请举手示意。谢谢陆淼老师的精彩分享，谢谢您，谢谢观众的提问，谢谢。